Women are and have always been superhuman, badasses. Las Cholitas Escaladoras from Bolivia prove this time and time again. These indigenous women show that the outdoors is for everyone. Trekking through the glens in the Scottish Highlands for 4 days last week with a rucksack that weighed at least 18 kilograms got me thinking how capable my short stature is. And yet, I don't see short brown women like myself being highlighted in the media as readily as my white counterpart. You have to dedicate a serious amount of time to find research on brown women whose love for the mountains is part of their ancestry, their history, their culture. And that's how I learned about the indigenous women in Bolivia who climb mountains with their polleras, their skirts. Based on a written piece by the National Geographic, Las Cholitas Escaladoras are a group of Aymara women. The Aymara are an indigenous group of the Andes who have a profound spiritual connection to the mountains. Las Cholitas Escaladoras have partnered with a travel company to offer guided trips where the public can experience high-altitude experiences. Like their elders, they are uprooting the Eurocentric beliefs and perspectives that have caused them hardship through mountain climbing. According to Dora, one of the Cholitas, and I quote, "I felt discrimination because of my age, for not knowing how to read, and for my eyes. But the mountain doesn't discriminate. Every time I climb, I feel stronger inside. For me, the mountains are also family. It's where I've found my friends, my sisters, my reason for being." End quote. Dora's statement is powerful. I feel it in my soul. Being able to breathe in picturesque landscapes where discrimination has not embedded itself is freeing, as I've learned in the remote places I have trekked. Walking along Loch Afric last week, I couldn't help but feel grateful for recognizing what matters in this life. Joy matters regardless of who we are or what we look like. We are all deserving of joy. That nature's beauty requires respect for its wellness, just as we do. That hate is a creation that doesn't sprout from the earth. That to hate means to poison the peace of our beating heart, the peace of the singing cuckoos tucked away in the mountains, the peace of the spatter of rain on tents, the peace of the strong wind sweeping across glens, the peace of the whistling kettle on an open fire. Dora reminds me how healing and safe nature can be. Dora reminds me how important it is to be in good relations with the environment and its inhabitants. That at the end of the day, we need each other to grow and evolve. The Cholitas Escaladoras have summited many of Bolivia's highest peaks. For instance, 6 Cholitas reached the top of the highest mountain in the Americas in Argentina at just under 7,000 meters. These women are trailblazers. One of the Cholitas, named Lita, believes, and I quote, "The mountain taught me there's no limit. If we can reach the summit, we can also achieve other things in life." End quote. That quote is what I love about being in the outdoors and putting one step in front of the other. Like Lita, the mountains have taught me that I can endure, that my 5'2" petite self has the fortitude and physical strength to chase what I want. In 2021, Estrella, another Cholita, became one of the first Bolivian women to be certified as a high-altitude climbing guide. Estrella, as well as her fellow Cholitas, climb with voluminous pleated skirts, waist-length pleated braids secured with knitted flowers, petticoats, crampons, and helmets. These women are fierce and fearless. The Cholitas Escaladoras began to climb with their skirts, their polleras, because that is all they had. But even now, they still refuse to wear anything else. Because, as they explain, and I quote, "It's who we are." End quote. The attire of these women is yet another way that they are leading the decolonizing agenda. As a brown woman living in Scotland, I still find myself hesitating to wear pieces that honor my indigeneity out in public. These women wear their culture every day. They have even perfected their ability to climb mountains, so much so that they've come up with a new climbing technique to prevent their polleras from getting caught in their crampons. The National Geographic piece explains that polleras date back to the invasion and genocide carried out by the Spanish. In the 16th century, indigenous women of the Andes were forced to wear European peasant-style dresses. Sadly, polleras became an object of racial and social discrimination, and women who wore polleras were called cholas, which is a colonial slur for indigenous women. The indigenous women of Bolivia have a history of being barred from hotels, restaurants, and even parts of La Paz, the capital. Lita highlights that no one wanted to be indigenous back then, which is why everyone dressed like Spanish women. I'm well acquainted with assimilation. It's something that I've bent to in my own way. Indigenous peoples of the Americas have been forced into making changes in order to survive. To this day, I think survival is still the objective for most brown and black people. Everything changed in the 90s and early 2000s though. Aymara and Quechua women began reclaiming the pollera and the diminutive of the terms chola, cholita. Both are now symbols of indigenous pride. These women have taken back their story and they are their own storytellers. The vibrant colors and designs of polleras now graced fashion runways, wrestling rings, skate parks, and as the Cholitas Escaladoras have shown, even mountain peaks. If you've ever seen a pollera, you would immediately observe the creative skill set required for making one. A pollera takes 1 to 3 weeks to make, and about 10 meters or so are often used to create the volume that they're known for. A pollera requires 4 to 5 layers of brightly colored petticoats stitched underneath to hold its bell shape. The tediousness about making these skirts comes when pressing and ironing the seams and bunching and pleating of the top of the skirt. The fabric is thick and therefore artisans use special tools like an alicate, which are pliers, to tightly gather and set the pleats. The polleras can be embellished further with lace, ribbon, or intricate floral embroidery for special occasions or festivals. After reading more about polleras, it's hard not to consider them works of art. More specifically, political art. Since weaving textiles was a system of communication between the past and present in Andean communities before the arrival of the Spanish colonizers, textiles reflected the identity and lifestyle of each indigenous group. Textiles were encoded with ancestral knowledge, traditions, and communal beliefs. Art was a tool of preservation, representation, and power. Textiles drove the Inca Empire's economy, and with recognizing this, the Spanish burned vast quantities of textiles. With the intention to strip the indigenous peoples of the Andes, just like other indigenous groups of the Americas, from their roots, the Spanish also banned the use of these textiles. However, Quechua scholar Dr. Angela Tapia Arce has helped me understand that while European skirts were forced upon the indigenous people in Bolivia, they still developed a type of skirt that represented Inca culture, and that is the pollera. Dr. Arce confirms that archaeological evidence and written chronicles prove that Inca women wore pollera-type garments. The pollera can be traced to the urku worn by indigenous women before colonization. Under colonial rule, the silhouette changed, but the foundation remained present, strong, indigenous. This is another example of indigenous resistance and resilience. The pollera was created from syncretism, which was a common practice for indigenous peoples to engage in order for their culture to survive, and so that they themselves could survive European rule. As Daniel Monasterios Tan from Vogue Philippines writes, and I quote, "The pollera is shaped by imperial intervention, by global exchange, by coercion and transformation. And yet for all that, it remains one of the clearest expressions of indigenous continuity in Bolivia." End quote. So, Las Cholitas Escaladoras are leading the way as advocates for indigenous empowerment, equality, and inclusivity. They are showing the world that indigenous peoples are not peoples of the past, that they are in the present and will be here with us in the future, guiding us how to enjoy the world around us and reminding us to embrace who we are. Learning about the Cholitas and their ability to endure and still show up in places where they aren't expected to be according to westernized society stirs up pride and relief within my soul. To see and read about indigenous peoples committing to themselves, their culture, to decolonization makes me believe that there is a chance for humanity to rectify itself. That's a bold statement to make, but the level of hatred which has revived itself lately cannot be ignored. Well, not for me. I've always believed in the power of art, the power to make something with your hands and potentially inspire, educate, a movement, a reclamation. And for indigenous peoples, art has given them an opportunity to share their story, their history. And most of the time, they are stories and histories that have been forced under a rock, as if they didn't exist. And if they did exist, they were revealed through a lens with an imperialist agenda. Las Cholitas wear their art, their polleras, everywhere they go. They look different, they stand out. For me, their message is that I can dream big without having to change who I am or where I come from. That my future depends how I understand my origins. That my identity is tied to the indigeneity that we as Mexicans, as mestizos, tend to ignore and not really reflect on. I'm grateful for the survival of art that originates from the first peoples of the Americas, even if it's just pieces here and there. Las Cholitas are climbing mountains their own way, and as I arrived to the last day of my trekking expedition along the African Tailway with sore shoulders and calves, I thought of them. I thought of them in high altitudes, using their ice axes to climb and pulling their weight up icy walls of glaciers. Friends, representation truly does matter. referencing these amazing women when I've been mentally and physically exhausted has gone a long way. Within the last couple of hours of my trek, I began thinking about all the research I needed to do once I was back home. I was curious to know what mountains my indigenous ancestors would have climbed and what their attire would have been. I wanted to know how colonization affected that. I wanted to know whether my obsessive love for walking through and up mountains comes from them. I wanted to know whether there are indigenous women climbing mountains in Mexico today. Indigenous women across the world have incurred plenty of obstacles. And to this day, they're not given the spotlight, the care, the respect that they deserve. I see it in the current political state of Bolivia as indigenous women protest against their conservative president, the crisis of missing and murdered indigenous women across Turtle Island, the racism that keeps indigenous women more vulnerable to gender-based violence. From a pollera, we can dive into history and politics. I hope we can all take a second look at the cultural objects that surround us. I hope we question their origins, their changes, and in turn question our stories, our histories. I hope we question the relation to ourselves. I hope we are willing to put in the time to reflect. I hope we decolonize. Thank you for joining me, friends, on this conversation about art, history, politics, and the outdoors. I love combining all of these topics and mapping out the connections that I see. Analysis can be exhilarating, but the reality of it can also be uncomfortable, painful even. Are there any connections that you've made? Or anything you'd like to add to this conversation? Comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Enjoy your weekend, friends. I hope you're able to get outside and take a walk to decompress and give yourself a moment to breathe. I'll see you next week.